Jainism. I gave a talk about that yesterday. Since it's the earliest religion, we should begin with that. Jainism, according to Jainism, they are the oldest vegetarian religion in the world. It's certainly the oldest vegetarian religion in India. We can't really ascertain when it began, because according to the Jains, it has no beginning and no end. There's no beginning point and no end point. A geometric figure with no beginning point and end point is a circle. So they view time as a circle. In fact, they see time as a great wheel, which is called the Kali Yuga, which has periods of extreme goodness and serenity, and periods of darkness and evil. And at the moment, we're in one of those very dark periods, and we have another 2,000 more years or so of darkness, unfortunately. But before we emerge into a period of the golden age, it's sort of a return to the original golden age, when all men and women on the planet, all animals were vegetarian and were Jains. The word Jain, Jain, I'm sure most of you are familiar with Jains, the term Jains. Actually, they weren't discovered to the West until the middle of the 19th century by British and German scholars. It's a very, at that time it was a very obscure sect, and very little was known about it. It's, today it constitutes 1% of the Hindu population, which is numbers from, it's estimated that it ranges from 6 to 9 million Jains. To the British and to Europeans, the Jains were of virtually no significance because they were vegetarian, they had peculiar customs, and they were seemingly irrelevant to the interests of the British colonials. But as the British became more sophisticated and more interested in Indian lore and customs, they began to acquire knowledge about the Jains and to share it with the West. The first Britisher actually to learn, first Westerner to learn Sanskrit, did so in the 18th century. The first European to learn Sanskrit was an Englishman, and Sir William Jones actually was a High Court judge in the 18th century, and he, with the aid of a pandit, he learned Sanskrit, and he discovered he was a classical scholar, and he was proficient in Greek and Latin. In fact, he read it for pleasure. And they were classical scholars. But the best minds were sent out to India in those days, and he discovered at the time that Sanskrit was a cognate language that was related to European languages. In other words, Sanskrit, Greek, Latin, Old Norse, and Celtic languages, and obviously the modern languages that stem from the Latin Romance languages are all related to Sanskrit. And he demonstrated this, and of course the Europeans were astounded to learn that Sanskrit was related to the European languages. And since then they've determined that India was invaded by a group of very warlike people who spoke a language called Indo-European, and these were nomadic, flesh-eating patriarchal peoples who worshipped father gods, sky gods, and they imposed their language on the Indians, the indigenous Indians, and they rode horses, and they had battle chariots and bows and arrows, and the people living in India were gentle vegetarian peoples, and they just fell before these conquerors who called themselves Aryans. This term is, it used to be a term that was used by scholars, but it has been discredited since Hitler's theories. Hitler's half-baked theories of racial supremacy. He called the Germans Aryans, which they were not. They're actually the original Aryans were the invaders of the Indo-European invaders of India, and the other Indo-European tribes invaded Greece and Italy and Northern Europe, and they imposed their language and their customs, which include animal sacrifice and patriarchal religion on the native peoples. So not only was India considered probably a vegetarian country, which was, the religion in India was prehistoric religion of India was probably a form of Jainism. The Jains claim that their religion, the first Tirthankara, Tirthankaras are the religious teachers in Jainism who have been elevated almost to the status of deities. The first Tirthankara, there are 24 Tirthankaras, and the first Tirthankara is supposed to have lived in the beginning of the Neolithic era, which is about 8,000 BC. And at this time, India, according to the traditions, India enjoyed a golden age, and all people were Jains, and the prevailing orthodoxy was ahimsa. Ahimsa is a Jain term. That's actually Sanskrit, which means doing no harm. Doing no harm to particularly animal life. The Jains are credited with having coined this term, ahimsa. And the first historical Tirthankara that we know about, we have the most information about, is a man by the name of Mahavira. And he was born in the 6th century BC. Approximately 540 BC. He was one of the Jains' greatest religious teachers, and he arose he was born to a royal family in a kingdom in northeastern India called Vaishali. And he was actually a contemporary of the Buddha, Siddhartha Gautama. And his family were practicing Jains, and they could trace, they worshipped the 23rd Tirthankara, who died in approximately 980 BC. The 23rd Tirthankara also preached ahimsa, nonviolence. So they can trace this lineage all the way back to the Neolithic. Mahavira arose as a religious reformer, actually, to preach against the excesses of the Aryan priests, the fire priests, who had invaded India, and they were spreading the practice of animal sacrifice throughout India. Originally they had arrived in northeastern India, and they're gradually making their way down through south. They were spreading east and south very very slowly because they met a lot of resistance from the natives, who were often called Dravidians. The Aryans imposed their caste system on the Indians. It's called a system called Varna, and they divided India into 4 castes. The priestly caste, the Brahmins, the warrior caste, the Kshatriyas, and the Vaisyas, or the merchant caste, and the Shudras, who were the lowest caste, and the Shudras. This also corresponds to skin color, pigmentation. The lowest members of the lowest class were the darkest, and the members of the Brahmin and the upper class, the twice-born castes, were light complexion. So not only did they impose this caste system on India, they also imposed racial discrimination. So they were the source of all evil things for India. The Mahavira was the first religious leader to rise up and protest against the Aryan religious invasions, and his contemporary Buddha, he and Buddha were rivals, and they were preaching against animal sacrifice and ahimsa and vegetarianism. In fact, when he became a Jain Muni, which is a Muni is a monk. They're all upset. The first thing he did was to launch an attack against animal sacrifice and flesh eating, which was becoming more and more widespread at this time. When he was 28 years old, his parents were very close to death, and he committed an act of violence. They committed an act of violence, I should say. The only act of violence that the Jains condone, it's a form of suicide called salakana. In which the Jain, at the end of his life, is permitted to take his life if he has noble intentions, if he has genuine desire to improve his life in the next, either the next incarnation, or ideally he will transcend all reincarnation and become a siddhi, or a person who has no karma and who can dwell in omniscience with the Tirthankras at the top of the world. That's sort of the ideal for a Jain. The Jains have the highest regard for animal life of any religion in the world. They have a hierarchy of values in which they assign senses to every form of life. The highest form of life are the 5-sensed animals. And these include, obviously, humans and all forms of animal life, quadrupeds, bipeds, fish, birds. These are all considered 5-sensed beings. So to eat a 5-sensed being is considered by a Jain to be an act of cannibalism. The 4-sensed beings are insects, include the category of insects. There are two categories of insects. The 4-sensed insects, such as grasshoppers and moths, and then the 3-sensed insects, which lack the power to hear. And these are the lower form of insect life. And then there are 2-sensed creatures. And then the lowest of all are things that we would consider inanimate, such as rocks and flames and water. They are endowed by the Jains with 1 sense. In other words, a stone is considered to have life of a sort, so that the entire universe, the entire world is charged with vitality. In other words, plants and fruit involves us in a mild form of violence. But of course, it's far preferable to eating 5 sensed beings. So the Jains recognize that life entails, living on the planet entails, involves us in violence. But they urge us to mitigate our violent acts and eat as far down on the scale of pain as possible. To eat 2 sensed beings instead of 5 sensed beings. And of course, it's impossible to eat 1 sensed being. I suppose people might try, but one can be reincarnated as a 1 sensed being. One could be reincarnated as a flame or as a rock. One's jiva or soul could actually be reincarnated in the form of a rock or in a flame. It's sort of a punitive karma, I guess, to be reincarnated as a flame or a water sprite. But some people might enjoy that. It would be even worse to have one's jiva or soul imprisoned in a stone. I guess that could be a very painful incarnation. The whole idea, I think the whole contribution of the Indic religions, the religions of India, to vegetarianism is that the notion of reincarnation, the doctrine of the transmigration of souls, which, according to the Jains, originates in Jainism, since they consider themselves to be the primal religion. The Jains believe that, they hold that Hinduism, as we know it, and Buddhism are actually offshoots of Jainism. The Jains not only invented the notion of karma, reincarnation, ahimsa, vegetarianism, but they also produced the epics, the Hindu epics, the so-called Hindu epics. So we owe a tremendous debt to Jainism, and more is being learned about religion now that the West is beginning to gravitate to vegetarianism and the ideals of nonviolence and ahimsa. It's interesting that the man who discovered the term, who first translated the term ahimsa, was Dr. Albert Schweitzer in the 1920s in his book on Indian philosophy. He translated the ahimsa, the term ahimsa, his phrase for ahimsa. The equivalent was reverence for life. That was his translation. I'm sure most of you have heard that phrase because it's become sort of the credo of the animal rights movement. And, so it's interesting. Jainism has influenced us through the very translation of the term that they originated. The Jains have also influenced Indian religion as well as Western religion. They sort of function as the social conscience of India. They regard themselves as the social conscience of India. And their conduct is governed by these very strict taboos against the taking of life. The priest, for example, will not eat food that is more than 24 hours old. Food for the priest has to be prepared within and consumed within 24 hours. And this is true of the Orthodox Jains as well. Because the food will invariably attract bacteria, and the ethic against killing life forms is so great that the Jain Munis and the Orthodox Jains will not consume food, leftover food that has attracted an excess of bacteria, and for the same reason, they will not drink milk. At least the Orthodox, the Munis will not drink milk because it tends to attract bacteria. They will not drink fermented juice or alcohol because it contains dead microbes, and so that makes them temperate, extremely temperate. So in a sense, they have the most stringent codes, ethical codes of any religion in India, and I think this serves to sort of confirm the great antiquity of their religion. Because usually the religions that have the greatest, the most complicated ethical codes are the oldest religions. A contemporary of Mahavira flourished in the 6th century BC, and he lived for 72 years. At the end of his life, he lived to be 72 years old. By the end of his life, he had attracted 200,000 followers. He made his followers promise at the time, just before he died, he made the promise that they would have no intermediaries. In other words, there would be no priests. He did not want the Jainism to be a priest-ridden religion, as Hinduism, unfortunately, has become. And as it was at the time, Hinduism was dominated by the Brahmins, who at the time of Mahavira were actually flesh eaters. Many of them were flesh eaters. And he and the Buddha succeeded in reforming Hinduism so that the flesh-eating practices and animal sacrificing practices of the Brahmins, by the end of Mahavira's time on earth, had given way, and they were becoming vegetarians. They succeeded, both of them succeeded in converting Brahmins to vegetarianism, and the Aryan gods, the sky gods, such as the gods of war and destruction, were discredited. A god like Indra, for example, was one of the great warrior gods of the early Hindu pantheon. Was no longer worshipped after Mahavira's time. The other gods of destruction among the Aryans, such as Agni, the fire god, were also discredited. So they did succeed in reforming Hinduism and making it into a vegetarian religion. At the end of his life, he also committed Salakana. He fasted to death, and this, as I said, is permissible at the end of life. The Jains permit suicide. One is an extremis, not earlier, of course. Teenagers or people in their 20s or 30s are not permitted to commit salakana. Another of the great institutions of Jainism that they've given to India is something called the Pinjarpal. The Pinjarpal is an animal rest home, and the animal rest home, the Pinjarpals, actually predate Mahavira. They're a very ancient institution among the Jains. It's hard to ascertain when they began. It's sort of lost in prehistory. But if you travel today, they still flourish in India. If you travel through Gujarat or in regions of India, where in Rajasthan, for example, where the Jains have concentrated, in every major community will find these Pinjarpals. These are, as I said, animal rest homes. Animals are taken off the streets. The Jain Munis go to the slaughterhouses and try to buy animals and to liberate them. They take them to the Pincher Falls and care for them. They are very actively involved in saving animal lives and delivering them. They rescue old and broken down animals, and they nurse them and try to maintain them. They also have, in the larger Pincher Falls, they have rooms dedicated to sustaining birds, repairing injured birds. They also have rooms set aside for insect rooms, where they have techniques for maintaining and sustaining insect life. The Jains are accused of being insect lovers, and I suppose there is some truth in this, because they do go out of their way to avoid doing harm to insects. They will, if there's a row of ants or something, they will avoid it. They will take. They always watch where they step to make sure that they don't tread on an ant or a bug or some kind. The Moonies carry these little devices called pinchas. In fact, Mahavir himself carried a pincha, which is it's like a broom, a whisk broom, that they use to sweep the path wherever they walk. And before they sit down, the Moonies, the monks, use these pinchas. Another thing that they do is, these were also practiced by Mahavir, they strain their water to make sure that there are no insects in the water. They very carefully, the Moonies, for example, very carefully inspect their clothing before they put it on to make sure that there are no insects gathered in the folds. So they're really quite fastidious about avoiding harming even the least forms of life. And they said they really do set an example for the rest of the country. They're not permitted to wear shoes, of course. They're vegan in their dress. They wear no animal products. Mahavira, in Mahavira's time, the Jains, most of the Jains were sky-clad. They call them sky-clad. Digambaras. Digambara means sky-clad, in other words, naked. That's a sort of poetic term for nudity, which is devoid of any connotation of evil or prurient. It was quite natural for them to go unclothed. First thing that he did, what Mahavira did when he renounced his princely prerogatives, was to take off his clothes and become a sky-clad Muni. When the first Western contact with the Jains was in the year 326 BC. It's actually very early. In the fateful year of 326 BC, Alexander the Great arrived with his phalanxes in northeastern India after having swept through the Persian Empire. The Persian Empire fell to Alexander in 333 BC, and he was pressing on to India, and he intended to conquer the whole of India as he had Persia. His men were invincible. The phalanx was an invincible tactical formation at that time, and it cut through armies like a knife through a pie crust. nothing could stand in his way. But when he got to the Indus River, the banks of the Indus River, he saw a group of naked men and women gathered in a circle, and they were exchanging views and talking animatedly. And this piqued his curiosity to see these naked men and women gathered in a circle, so he and his interpreter went over to them and tried to engage them in conversation. They ignored him, and he urged his interpreter to make them participate in the conversation. But they said they would be willing to talk to him if he would remove his armor, because they were Jains, and they would not talk to a man who was wearing armor. They were pacifists, naturally, as the Jains are today. They will not serve in the military. They would not deign to talk to a man who was in battle dress. So Alexander removed his battle dress, and he began talking to them through his interpreter. Within 3 weeks, he retreated from India, which is rather ironic. Here was probably the greatest world conqueror who had ever lived, and he met the Jains, probably the greatest world renouncers who ever lived. And he was, they speculated that he was so baffled by their answers and their ideas that he saw no reason to press on, and he retreated, and within 6 years he died of chronic alcoholism. So I guess the moral is take off your armor when you see a Jain, or you renounce the world, renounce carnivorism and ideas of conquest. Probably one of the greatest paradigms that the Indian religions offer us. And another great contemporary of Mahavira, who's probably more familiar to us, is the Buddha, Siddhartha Gautama.
He was a Jain?
It's believed actually that he was a Jain. In that Buddhism is really a form of Jainism, a less stringent form of Jainism that is really more suitable for the export market, because it doesn't have these rather over stringent demands, of avoiding insect life. The priests are not held to the same high standards that the Jain priests are. For example, Jain priests are not permitted to touch money, whereas Buddhist priests can, are able to touch money. Do so very prudently. He was also born in the same. Curiously enough, the Buddha was born not far from Mahavira, in the same region of India. In the region of Bihar, modern Bihar, which is not far from Nepal, in northeastern India. They actually spoke the same language, the same dialect, called Magathi. So it's really quite astounding that two of the greatest world teachers in history were born within a few miles of each other and spoke the same language, and were born approximately the same time. He was also born into a royal family, and he was a member. He, like Mahavira, was a member of the warrior caste, the Kshatriya caste, which is also ironic. But I guess he, in a sense, he exemplifies the warrior virtues, many of the warrior virtues in Mahavira, because they were able to survive these austerities. They had enormous self-discipline. They went for years living by themselves and traveling in the forests, wearing sky-clad. So I guess, in a sense, they exemplify those Kshatriya virtues of courage and self-reliance and self-discipline. But he, like Mahavira, renounced his princely rights, and he had seen he had a very pampered life, he was very, very indulged and very spoiled. But the story is that he was riding his horse, and he saw an old man. He saw actually 4 visions, 4 sights that decided him to become a Jain. An old man, a sick man, a corpse, and an ascetic. This was a massive dose of reality, supposedly, to a man who had rarely left the precincts of the palace grounds, because everything was done for him, and he had they had some servants galore, and who danced attendance on him and the family. But he gave all this up to become an ascetic himself. It's believed by many scholars that he actually became Jain, because this was really the only alternative at the time. If one wanted to become a sadhu, the earliest sadhus were Jains. A sadhu was a wandering ascetic. He did not, he joined a different, actually he did join supposedly the same religious group that Mahavira belonged to, the followers of Parshwa, the earliest, the 23rd Tirthankara. His name is Parshwa. Parshwa, he was born, he died in 925 BC. And his followers preached ahimsa, nonviolence, and asceticism. Much as the same. They were the same. He was the same Tirthankara. He's the 23rd Tirthankara, who Mahavira's parents and Mahavira followed. Buddha was sky-clad. He wore a veil. He also carried a pincha to sweep the path of insects. So people have concluded that he was probably a Jain, but he formulated his own brand of Jainism, and he was extremely successful in preaching, like Mahavira. He was extremely successful in reforming the excesses of the Brahmin, the Hindu priesthood, the Brahmins, who at this time were animal sacrificers. So he and Mahavira had very much the same mission, which was to reform Hinduism and to turn it into a form of Jainism, actually, to turn it back into a form of Jainism as it was originally. So he was very successful in doing so, and he won as many. He and Mahavira were rivals. He went forth to preach his message, which was to moderate, to practice vegetarianism. The first precept of his religion was to cherish all life. In other words, to practice ahimsa and to take no life, no animal life, not to do harm to animal life. both Mahavira and Buddha have the same precepts in their religion. To avoid the taking of life, to practice honesty, not to take what is not offered. That's a very important precept. The third precept, not to take what is not offered in Jainism, which is very much related to the first precept of to do no harm and to cherish all life. Because if you do not take the life of an animal, it is not offered. You're practicing the ultimate theft. If you take the life of someone, take someone's life, that is the ultimate form of theft. So that is a very important precept, which the Buddha preached as well. Buddhism, like Jainism, admitted women into the Buddhist movement. This is one of the great attractions of Buddhism and Jainism as well, because Hinduism would not admit women into the priesthood, and would not admit women. They're considered inferior beings in Hinduism. Whereas in Buddhism and Jainism, women are treated as equals, and they were allowed to become monks in Buddhism as well as in Jainism. They also, it's believed that the greatest number of their followers, strangely enough, were women. The women actually outnumbered the men among the Buddhist followers. And in the early Shanga, was the Buddhist community, the original Buddhist, the women were admitted on an equal footing. And this is true today. If you go to the Jain temples, you will find sadhuis as well as sadhus. If you go to the Buddhist temples in China or in Japan, other Asian countries. Of course, Buddhism died out in India. It did not, like Christianity, it died out in the country of its origin, and it flourished abroad as a proselytizing religion in other countries. In order to see Buddhism in action, you can't go to India. To see it truly a vital form of Buddhism, you have to go to foreign countries, such as the countries of Southeast Asia, or the Theravada countries, or the Mahayana countries of Japan and China, and America. America is also becoming a place where Buddhism is finding a home, a new home. It's beginning to flourish, spread and flourish in America as well. So you will find that if you go to an American Buddhist temple, you will find the women performing services, and you will find female monks who are treated as equals. This isn't always true in Japan or China, but they do. There is still discrimination to some degree, but they are. It is one of the few religions that recognize contribution of women. In Jainism as well. Jainism did not spread beyond the borders of India. It had enormous staying power because it's believed that Buddhism was really extinguished by the militant Hinduism, as well as probably the coup de grace was administered by the Muslim invasions in the beginning in the 12th century AD, when the Mongolians and the Muslims swept into India. They succeeded in stamping out most of Buddhism in the north. They also persecuted the Jains and destroyed many of their temples, the most ancient temples
Then, of course, they desecrated a lot of Hindu temples as well. Although the Jains were, curiously enough, for a pacifistic religion, they were much more resourceful in resisting the Mughal onslaught, and they survived, whereas the Buddhists did not. And the combination of militant Hinduism and the Muslim invasions, successive waves of Muslim invasions, eventually destroyed Buddhism within India. There are pockets of Buddhism. I mean, you can find temples there, but it's really they exist more as curiosities and showcases. It is no longer one of the great religions of India. It's now flourishes abroad. But the Buddha's message to cherish all life, the first precept, has been honored until quite recently in all of the Asian countries, in all of the monasteries. In any Buddhist country, vegetarian food is served. It's required that the monks eat vegetarian food. Until recently, in China, until the Westernization took hold in those countries, the first precept was honored not only by the monks, but by the people at large. This is also true in Japan. The monasteries were exclusively vegetarian, and a monk, for example, in 19th century Japan, who even ate so much as ate fish, was considered to be a sort of a reprobate. And there was a term for the monk, namaguzu bozo, which means fishy-smelling monk, which is a pejorative term at that time. Today it would be meaningless because of the influence of Westernization has caused even the monks in the monastery to sneak out and eat flesh, furtively when no one's watching. There's a great controversy that surrounds the death of the Buddha. There's a tradition that the Buddha died from food poisoning, from having eaten pig flesh. I don't know how many of you are familiar with that. That story, that myth actually, that has been around for quite a while, that the Buddha was in his 80s and at the end of his life, and one of his followers served him a dish of pig flesh, supposedly. But recently, this has been put to rest. Scholars have demonstrated that the term that was used was actually mistranslated. The followers, one of his closest followers, served him a dish called sukara mandava, which can be rendered either as a subjective genitive, pig's flesh, or an objective genitive, food beloved of pigs. In other words, a tree mushroom. So pigs love mushrooms. In fact, in France they use them to scent out the truffles, which are very exquisite mushrooms. And this is one of the pig's favorite food is mushroom. So actually, the term was an objective genitive instead of a subjective genitive, and this has caused many people to think that the Buddha recanted and that he was actually gave up his vegetarianism at the end of his life, which is absurd because he was a very devout vegetarian, and he would never have departed from his teachings at the end of his life. Unfortunately, the dish did kill him, but it's quite possible it may have been a poisonous mushroom and not a dish of pig's flesh. You can read many histories of scholarly histories of Buddhism and find that they say that they just claim that he ate pig's flesh, hog's flesh, and that's what did it, trichinosis or something. But that's preposterous. So I thought we should put that myth to rest. And recently, scholarship has shown that, for example, Miss Rise David, one of the most eminent Buddhist scholars, has written in her Manual of Buddhism, the pig's flesh interpretation is cast into further doubt when she observed a food compound of pig flesh, sukaramamsa, does occur once in the scriptures, in a sutta of a curiously unworthy kind, where a householder, in inviting Gautama to dine, goes through quite a menu in refrain detail. Madhava is nowhere else associated with meat, and I remain of Brace David's opinion that we have here a root, such as truffles, much sought by swine, and which may have been called pig's joy. Such a root we actually have. This the critics did not know. In our pig nut, the little nut-shaped bulbous root of which, called also earth nuts, are liked by both pigs and children. So that should silence the controversy about the Buddha's last meal. This is really very important because, of course, everyone the Buddhist followers in Southeast Asia and the Theravadins, for example, put great store by what the Buddha said, and the Theravadins have misinterpreted this, and among other things, other teachings of the Buddha. Somehow they've been accused of tampering with the text of the Buddha's preaching, and they have come up with a sutra which says that it's permissible to eat flesh if the flesh is prepared by someone else and the animal has not been killed expressly for you. So this is the excuse they use in such countries as Burma and Ceylon and Thailand, I guess, the Theravada countries. They use this as a pretext for eating meat. But this has been shown recently by scholars to have been a tampering with the text. The Buddha never intended anyone to provide flesh for another person. And he would shrink in horror from such an idea. Hinduism is the third great vegetarian religion in India, and it's difficult to tell where it began. The Jains teach that Hinduism is actually a heresy of Jainism, that all religion stems from Jainism, and that it was corrupted by the Aryan invaders. And according to the Buddhists and the Jains, and many historians, I think, corroborate this, the Buddhists and the Jains reformed Hinduism into what it is today. The vegetarian practices of Hinduism owe a great, the practitioners of Hinduism owe a great debt to the Jains and the Buddhists for purifying the teachings. In the cities of India, the major cities, the Hindus are not as scrupulous in adhering to the dictates of the dietary dictates of Hinduism as the Jains and the Buddhists are. But many of the Brahmin families throughout India, the Brahmins and the Kshatriya, the Vaisyas actually, the Brahmins and the Vaisyas still practice vegetarianism, especially in the southern India. The Kshatriyas are the warrior caste, and more, I guess, more Kshatriyas tend to be meat eaters because it was permitted for Kshatriyas to eat flesh on the eve of battle, for example. And it's considered, flesh for the Kshatriya is considered to infuse them with virility and courage. So they would eat flesh just as a ritual before battle. They also worship their weapons, and they perform rituals involving their weapons. Of course, India, the Kshatriyas are very fierce fighters, and India is dependent on them for the defense of their country against the Muslims and against a host of other invaders. So they have come to consume flesh more regularly than the other castes, twice-born castes, either the Brahmins or the Vaisyas, the merchants. So one will find more vegetarians among the Brahmins and the Vaisyas. It's reckoned that about 88% of Indians are vegetarians today, practicing vegetarians. And it's still a criminal offense to kill animals, to slaughter animals in many of the states of India today. I hope that's a practice that we would do well to enforce. Yes?
They do consume dairy products though, right?
Yes, they do, yes.
And how does that work into their second precept about not taking anything that's not offered to them? How do they resolve that? And I also wonder how that works in taking of plants.
Well, the dairy business until quite recently in India has not been the form of agribusiness that has become in this country. It's not considered to be as cruel, a cruel industry as it has become. It's not the ruthless industry that it has become in the West. It's believed that animals, the cow does, when it lactates, it does need to be milked, and it does give of its milk freely. I guess they would rationalize it that way. There are many Jains. So the Jain priests, the very Orthodox Jain priests, will not touch milk, will not drink milk. But it is true that it is widely practiced. Milk drinking is widely practiced in India, but they don't drink rivers of milk as we do in the West. You might have a dollop of yogurt at a meal, or they may have they cook with ghee, that's true, which is clarified butter. They use a little milk in their cooking, but they really don't consume as much as Westerners do. So, any other questions?
Well, what was that about taking the plants? Do they
Oh.
just assume that is offered to them?
Well, the Jains will not take root vegetables, for example. They will not. The Jains are not permitted to eat root vegetables for that reason, because it destroys the plant. It often destroys the plant, and it disturbs the insect life the subterranean insect life that is infesting the root system. That's why they won't eat root vegetables. So the Jains do try to take plants that are more readily available, such as fruit and the plants that they feel are more available, more accessible. So they go out of their way to avoid taking what is not offered. But they, as I said, they realize that life involves suffering and committing violence, even eating a plant, even eating fruit. You have to live on something or we'll die. Even eating fruit involves killing a 2-cent life form. So it's the question of minimizing injury and eating as low on the scale of pain as possible. Anyone else? Yes?
Question about the animal restaurants.
Yes.
They do the carnivorous animals, how do they eat the carnivorous animals?
Yeah, I guess they do feed them whatever, I guess they have to feed them dog food and whatnot. And they've devised techniques now for sustaining cats and dogs on vegetarian pet food. They have devised vegetarian pet foods.
But do they like have dog and cat food that are from animals in India? Is that what you're saying?
I really don't know how that works. I haven't seen them do that, but I guess they would have to do that. Again, it's balancing the interest of one interest. That I guess no, they don't claim to be free of violence. They don't claim to be immaculate or anything. I mean, they try to do the minimum of harm. Yes.
Do they deal with that emotionally somehow through ritual or something?
What's that?
What you're talking about now, which is that they know that they have to be violent, although they don't feel that that's good.
Yeah.
But they sort of compromise themselves to doing that in some way.
Oh yes. Well, they do. You know, they do.
Do they emotionally deal with that?
They realize that they do everything they can to reduce their karmic debt. The idea is to completely absolve one's karma before going on to the next life. So it's inevitable that one will have bad karma in this life by causing injury to other people, other animals. It's not impossible to live without causing pain to some other creature. So they do it by doing penances, doing good deeds, doing good works. For example, the families take care of they look after the animals. It's a great honor to feed the monks. The monks, for example, do not cook for themselves. The community, families in the community provide food for the monks. It's a great honor, and they can diminish their karma by feeding the monks, by beautifying the temples, by actually visiting all the temples in India, the Jain temple. That's a way of absolving karma. So through good works, they can offset the bad karma. As I said at the outset, the great debt. I think America is becoming more conscious of. I think the ethos of reincarnation, reincarnationism, is making a kind of inroad in American spirituality, spiritual life, and people are talking about it more and more. Christianity, for example, had a reincarnation doctrine that was abolished by the Nicene Council in the 3rd century. So every vegetarian religion, that seems to be one of the chief characteristics of a vegetarian religion, that it incorporates the doctrine of transmigration and reincarnation. So that's one of the great contributions that Indian religions have made, I think. And I think if Western religions will evolve, they will eventually come back to having a doctrine of reincarnation, because to believe that your soul may enter the body of an animal will prevent you from eating the animal, or that your relative may be incarnated in a cow. Why would you wouldn't want to eat the cow? If there's any chance of that. That's the break. That's the moral break on carnivorism, I think, and that's what we need, I think. Yes.
Seems to me it appeals to transmigration or reincarnation, or in sometimes only appeals to self-interest. Are there some other ethical considerations that sort of inform the practice of Islam or the Pinter poles?
Well, the Pinter poles are certainly a demonstration of their concern, genuine concern for animal life. And reincarnation, it is a matter of self-interest, but it's also you're protecting the interest of your relative's body, I guess, or your friend's body, maybe reincarnated. So it works both ways. It's reciprocal interest, actually. Dr. Albert Schweitzer was in addition to being a great student of philosophy and pianist, was an organist and humanitarian, was also a devout Catholic, and he admired the Jains tremendously, but he criticized them for being obsessed with purity, and he accused them of not being humanitarians at all, not being compassionate. They were only interested Schweitzer was writing in the late 1920s, and he had never traveled to India, and he'd never met a Jain, because the Jains did not disperse from India until the 1950s. They had never left India. They began to leave India and settle in Africa because of the economic conditions there in the 1950s, and they were the only religious group who had the finances to be able to afford to travel. The Jains are the wealthiest religious community in India per capita, and so many of them left the country. But Schweitzer had this criticism, but I would submit that if Schweitzer had traveled to India and witnessed the Pincher Pulse, for example, he might have had a different idea. And or if he had gone to a Jain household and watched the Jain housewife picking through the grain and the dal and the vegetables to make sure that there were no insects in the dal or the grain. And if she could find one, she would lift it up and take it out to the garden, deposit it gently in the garden. So there is a true ethical concern for animal welfare, animal comfort in Jainism, and I think Schweitzer is wrong about their being exclusively concerned with ritual purity. He sort of arrived at this idea in his study, the privacy of his study. He didn't actually witness any of this. So, and he was also, being a devout Catholic, he did not want to put Christianity in the shade. He did not want to admit that Jainism might be a superior religion, which I think on ethical grounds one would have to admit. Yes?
What does current day Jainism think about human population? Do they have any ethics around human reproduction? And how many, have a sense of what is the...
Well, they're not reproducing, and they're not multiplying exponentially. I mean, their population is stable.
Is there an explicit ethic of...
Well, the monks practice celibacy. They believe that sex is a waste of passion and a waste of seed, and being a life form. They do not believe in expending seed for that. So I guess I haven't familiarized myself with their positions on the state of the planet, or but it is the most ecologically sophisticated religion, because they the idea that everything on earth is charged with life, rocks and stones and flames and water has life, would tend to make one ecologically responsible in one's thinking. But whether they would, I don't think they would support. I guess many of them support the family planning, but I don't know. I don't think that they are in great peril of reproducing beyond their capacity, because their population is quite stable. And India itself, of course, is overflowing, with achieving millions and millions of people. But the Jains, I don't know what their position is on that, on birth control, except abstinence. They do urge abstinence. Any other questions? Yeah.
I'm wondering about, it seems like many of the teachings of Jainism are quite relevant to the 20th century, particularly the ecological concepts. But I have a sense that the Jains are quite private and keep to themselves rather than trying to propagate their teachings.
That's right. Yeah, that's why they've only been discovered recently, quite recently, in the 19th century. And we are still learning about them today, because they make no effort to publicize their activities. And more and more Jains, however, are settling in the West. And in fact, there are several Jains at this conference. And they had a Jain convention several weeks ago in Pittsburgh. And there are 20,000 Jains in the United States and 25,000 Jains in England. So I think this will cause the growing awareness in Westerners. And in fact, there's there's an exhibit of Jain artifacts and that is traveling from India this year, I believe, throughout the United States, to museums in Washington and California. So the awareness of Jainism is growing. I think as the West becomes more enlightened about animal suffering and ahimsa, that they will make an effort to learn more about this great religion.
Am I getting personal if I ask, are you a Jain?
No. I'm interested in it. I studied it.
Isn't it true that the temples are closed to non-Jains?
No, not at all. They are very open. They welcome anyone to attend. It's a very open religion, very unexclusive, non-exclusive. It's not difficult to actually become a member of the church, or the temple, I should say. And there's no discrimination, racial or caste or financial. And but it's a very, it's a stringent religion. You have to be a very strict vegetarian. So that has kept a lot of people from joining. Yes.
Are there any Jain temples in Seattle?
In Seattle, there may well be. There are temples in many of the cities on the East Coast that I know of. I really can't. I don't live in the area, so I can't speak to it. But you could probably find one. You'd be surprised. Yes. Yeah. They tend to settle on the East Coast, though. I think because any other questions?
The Jain stance on not eating the root vegetables, do they do any plowing of the land to?
Well, no. In fact, the Jains have, from time immemorial, they've been discouraged from entering certain trades, such as agriculture. That's one of the trades that is forbidden for them to enter. They cannot become farmers. They cannot enter the leather trade or the restaurant trades because these are more harmful to animal life than others. So they have, as a result, they've been compelled to go into such professions as commerce, banking, law, professor, and this is how they've become the wealthiest community in India. They're highly educated, and they have a genius for commerce and for making money. And they use their wealth to beautify the temples and to found new temples and to improve the community, the Jain community. Another interesting feature is that the Jains are not permitted to own pets. They do not keep pets because they consider it cruel to have a pet as a plaything or as an object. Yes?
Is it possible for them to eat fruit unless they're hunters and gatherers, which I don't think. But they're eating food that other people prepared in a violent way.
In a violent way?
Yeah.
Well,
the food that they eat, it seems to me, would be grown by people who do plant food.
yeah, that's true.
So it seems to me they wouldn't eat unless it was prepared in a violent way.
Yeah, that's a very good point. They have been accused of hypocrisy for that reason, because they let other people do their work for them. They let other people fight their wars. They let other people, as you say, plow the fields and harvest the crops for them. They sort of let George do it ethic. It's a beautiful phenomenon. I guess one can accuse them of that, but they do try to minimize they do what they can to minimize causing pain. Yeah. Yeah.
So it's a little bit like the Buddhists that say it's okay to eat meat as long as,
Well, I wouldn't. No, that's carrying it too far.
It's kind of the same thing.
He was saying that it's like the Buddhists who say it's permissible to eat meat if another person kills the animal. Well, no, I don't think harvesting fruit or vegetables is tantamount to killing an animal.
But they can't have a self-contained community.
Well, there are some nowadays there are Jain farmers, but for the most part they do avoid the agricultural trades. They exchange their they do their part. They exchange their work, the product of their labor, for the farmer who is not bothered by it. Inevitably there will be people who will not mind farming, enjoy farming. Not everyone will have this ethic, I guess, but perhaps today it will be more possible to have automated farming or something. No one will actually have to do it; it'll just be done by machines. So no one will have to bear the moral brunt of killing insects. Yes.
Is there a caste system among the Jains, or are they just a group unto themselves?
Well, I think in every society there is a caste pecking order that's unavoidable, but it's not as rigid as the Hindu system. I mean, they're bound to be richer and poorer, and people considered higher or lower in any community, even in America, which is supposedly a classless society. We have quite a rigid hierarchy here. So, yeah, I think there is it's an unspoken caste system, but you can surmount it. It's nothing that will interfere with your life. As in Hinduism, for example, if you're born into the wrong caste, there's very little social mobility. If you fall in love with a woman from a higher caste or vice versa, your family will disown you and you'll be forever polluted. And in Jainism, that doesn't happen. But there are obviously their marriages tend to be arranged also among the Jains. They obviously want the parents of a daughter want them to marry the best, to make the best match possible. So it's human nature, I guess. Yes.
Do you know what the position is on vegetarianism from some of the organized Buddhist religions in particular? Does the Dalai Lama speak on this subject at all?
Well, the Tibetan Buddhists are not vegetarians for the most part. It's the only strain of Buddhism. No, actually, I think he said he tried it for a while, but he's no longer vegetarian, as far as I know. And the Tibetan Buddhists are quite different from the other branches of Buddhism. They tend to be carnivorous. It's the only sect of Buddhism that is. That doesn't pretend not to be.
What about the Japanese Buddhists? They eat meat too.
Well, the average person does, but not in the monasteries. Whereas in the the Tibetan monasteries, they do serve meat. Is that it? Or